Here in Seneferu's procedural pipeline. Seneferu has predefined processes for the hair, which are the hair groom, hair setup, and hair compound setup. The hair groom is as it is for the hair grooming. The hair setup is for configuring this hair groom with the body and other objects by configuring the dynamic properties and the collision rules and other stuff to make a setup that is ready for simulating the character or whatever the asset is for the shots later. The hair compound setup is for simulating the hair in cases if this hair is growing on surfaces that is simulated by itself, like for example when growing a hair on a simulated cloth, or growing a hair that will be simulated on top of a simulated body that has muscle simulation, for example, like the case with some animals and stuff. So let's have a quick look on this. The first thing, I will set the task to current to connect the production manager to Maya's task control and click on load dependencies. This will load for you everything you need to do your task. And as you see, the production manager detected and loaded the clothes because the cloth might be needed to be considered when you are doing the grooming, especially if you are going to do long hair. And by the way, the long hair of a character like this one, if she will have long hair that interact with the clothes, then in that case, when we do the setup, we will not make hair setup, but we will make hair compound setup, because in that case, the simulation of the hair should be affected by the simulation of the clothes. Anyway, these are not big deal. When you come to this, you will understand it more. And any hair setup can work for the other, it doesn't matter, but it's recommended that you use the compound setup in cases when, as I said, that the hair is going to interact with previously simulated objects. This will help the production manager to manage the technical correlations between the processes to let you avoid any problems or technical issues later. So this, now you can just when you are doing the hair groom, you can follow any technique you would like to follow to make the hair groom. However, there are two methods that Seneferu has great support for. Seneferu supports fully supports Yeti and supports a hair system called NR Hair, which is our hair system that ships with Seneferu for free. The NR Hair actually is just a render procedural for hair. It's not a complete hair system like Yeti, but after you have made the groom, like the one I have already done here, then NR Hair can take these groom curves and creates the final render hair in render time based on these curves. In other words, the NR Hair is a procedural for RenderMan and Arnold that takes a limbic cache of the guide hair and creates the final render hair in render time. What you are going to do is simply that, of course, I will not talk about Yeti itself, because if you are a hair TD, then you already know your techniques about hair and Yeti or any others. But since this is new for you, then I will go quickly on what you can do to use NR Hair. What you are going to do is that you will create the grooming curves as you want, following any technique as I just said. Then you put all the hairs that will, or the guides that will have the same hair properties together in one group, and after that you click on the NR hair. Because this is actually failing because this group is already having the properties. Let's say that we have a new group here. If I have this group outside, let's call it whatever, then when you click on this button, this will create the hair properties of this object, where you can put the density and radius and all the other parameters that controls the look of the hair, including the shading group that you want to assign it. In our case, let's say that I want this to be hair shader, and I will when this is tagged as hair, if you resolve the shader on this group, it will assign the hair shader to this. It doesn't look proper, but now this is having a hair shader assigned to it. If you want to see how your character look like in the viewport when you are doing the grooming, you can use the shader resolve and resolve the anim look. This will give you the, let me hide the hair first. This will show you the textured character in the viewport. If you want the final look of the character, which is the final shaders or how it's going to be rendered out at the end, you can use this to resolve the shaders rather than resolving the anim look. The shader resolve will assign all the shaders and textures that this character will use in render time for the final shot, because you might need all of that when you are configuring the density and the color of the hair. And by the way, in the hair groom process, we also, if you are going to have a different color than the default of the hair shader, then of course this is the time when you will have to do it. Because whatever you will do in the grooming here, it will travel through the rest with this character through the rest of the production. So if you want to colorize the hair or add any textures, then this is the time to do it here. But notice that NR hair doesn't support per hair color yet, so it's just for normal character hair. But if you want to do something like animal with fur that has accurate color pattern, then NR hair is not your choice. You can go for Yeti or shave and haircut or any other hair system. But notice that the other hair systems like shave and haircut or XGen, you will need to configure your pipeline to output the process to something other than NR hair or Yeti, because you need to make it to go out like rib or ASSs or something like that. So when you load dependencies for future for future processes later, then these rib archives of the hair cache will be loaded instead. But if you are using NR hair to render your final hair after you simulated it, then this will give you a very good performance, because NR hair is designed to consume very small capacity and the memory, and to run very fast and efficient in comparison to any other methods that I was just saying, because NR hair is a very light version of creating and rendering hair in render time, so it doesn't consume a memory that you that you want to consider. Actually, it's just any simple object. That's why it's a very good choice for especially for secondary and extra characters, at least for the current version, that it's still new and has a lot of things to add to it. Okay, once you did the groom and you tagged your groups to shaders, and by the way, each group of the hair will have its own hair parameters, so you can do that. So after you have done, then you will select everything and create asset locator, then click on publish. I will not publish this one anyway because I already have it published here, which is the one that I checked out. So this is this regarding to the hair groom. Then let's step forward to the hair setups. Now let's work on the task, hair setup. We set the task to current, so we connect to Seneferu task control in Maya and set the task to in progress and click on load dependencies. Of course, load dependencies will configure everything in our scene. It will load all the dependencies we need to do our job. You will notice here that Seneferu loaded the rig and targeted the rig with the anim clip test, and he loaded the close setup cache and retargeted the close setup cache with the close simulation test that we did before. This is how these setup is, these processors are configured in the processes control table. It's this is configured to be loaded as retarget the rig, and this is configured to be loaded as retarget the close setup. So this is only when it's loaded for hair compound setup, in addition to some other processes. So if you, for example, now query the version of this, you will find that this is close sim test 1 and it's loaded on or targeted the close setup. And if you check the version of this, you will find that this is anim clip test version 3, which is also targeted our static cache rig cache. This is not the Maya scene of the rig, and this is not the Maya scene of the close setup, but this is a one frame cache of each one of them respectively. And notice that we are not interested about these objects anymore. These were temporary objects that were when we started doing the groom at very early stage, when we are still at early stage of building the character. But when we want to do the hair setup now, then of course we want to build the setup that interacts with the simulation of the clothes and follows the animation of the character. So these static objects were just for reference when we started doing the groom at the early stage. In other words, you can say that the hair groom is an initial version of the hair setup, and we will forget the hair groom completely after we make our first version of the actual hair setup. So any future updates or modifications needed to be applied on the hair should be applied on the hair setup, not the hair groom, because all the setups and connections and correlations to the other assets that we are going to build in this setup task, we don't want to repeat them again and again when we modify anything in the hair. So if you're interested to load static setup, you can just ignore these and load dependencies. This will load for you or will build for you a setup without or dependencies without without applying any animation or cache on the close. So if you get the version of this, you will find that this is rig version 3, and this is the close setup version 2, which is actually the static cache as we said before. If I click on Alt reference, this will retarget the close. Now it became version close sim version 1, and if you if we loaded also this clip, it will retarget the rig and it will become anim clip test. Notice that you might be having for this character many anim clip tests and many close sim tests. So it's always recommended that when whoever is creating the task in the project database, he should give it a name so you can tell which anim clip and which close sim you want to load. So this task actually is something wrong. You never, nobody should ever do such task without subcontext. So it had to have any other name like close sim test, close sim test, whatever. But it has to have name, and this name should be similar to the anim clip that is going to be used with it. So now I will proceed with this scene actually because it's the same thing, and I will hide these objects so we don't get confused because we don't need these objects anymore. Our work, as we mentioned, will be on the simulated clothes and this. By the way, when we publish the final hair compound setup is exactly like what happened in the clothes setup. What will happen is that Seneferu will do something called reset close setup and reset rig before running the publish. These, for your information, are in the processes control table. If you go to the hair compound setup, you will notice that this process is configured to be published by retarget rig and retarget close setup and publish Maya and tags XML. So that's what's going to happen when we publish this setup. So now I will make the setup and then I will proceed. Okay, now the setup is done and we are ready to publish. This is a test for the simulation. And now how can we publish this is that we want to, of course, cache tag our hair objects, which is our hair groups that we mentioned before. We will cache these objects. In addition to this, if your setup has any something like beads that should be moving with hair, then you should select these beads and click on cache tag. In that case, or any objects that are going to be cached with the hair or will be moved according to the hair motion or dynamics, then you need to tag these objects too. In that case, the objects that you are going to cache will be saved as or will be cached as Alembic or USD, depending on how did you configure your pipeline, in addition to the NR hair or the Yeti hair, depending on what type of or maybe RIB archives or ASSs, depending on how did you configure the caching of hair in your pipeline. So by default, it will be configured to automatically detect NR hair or Yeti. Otherwise, you should configure it to RIB or any other type. So after tagging these objects, which are, by the way, if you remember, these are the objects that had the hair settings, and now we can select everything we have and create asset locator. It's recommended to do that it doesn't matter. Actually, we can create it anywhere, create asset locator. But sometimes it could be good to make it at frame 900 where the solver is configured to start simulating from, which is the start frame of the solver, I mean. Maybe we can also resolve the anim look to have better looking of that. And by the way, we don't want to have the scalp visible when we publish our setup, just to have a clean look. Set to shaded mode, and let's make a play blast. And now we are ready to publish, and I do have a play blast to share during the publish, and just click on the publish button, proceed. And take a snapshot for this, and here we can get our movies, which is this one. Now notice the setup that to get the proper setup, the task control will go to frame 900 and publish the static, will publish the scene when these are static objects. Now, if you get the version of this, you will find that, as we mentioned before, the publish is doing reset trig and reset close setup before doing the actual publish. So if you check out this option setup now, you will find what you see here, that these are now static. And if you shift click on this, you can see the play blast that we did. This is for reviewing purpose. So that's it for the hair compound setup. I will go quickly on a normal setup that doesn't have interaction. These are actually notification that the simulation test for this is ready. Because we have one, we can delete this task. Actually, we don't need it, and this is for some of the shots that the system is telling me that they are the hair simulation for these shots are ready, because the animation of them is ready, and now the hair compound setup is ready. So Seneferu detected that these tasks can be done now. Let's see another hair setup. This time is a guy, and as usual, set in progress, load dependencies. This time we have only the anim clip test applied. The closed sim is not coming for this character because this is hair setup, not hair compound setup. The reason why the hair setup doesn't need that is that our hair in this case shouldn't or doesn't need to be interacting with the clothes because it's a standalone simulation that can run in parallel to the closed simulation. So what we are going to do is to just go to frame 900 to get our solver start frame at this point, and we will make the closed setup, and as we said before, we will cache tag the hair objects and publish. That's it. So now if we go to any ready to start hair simulation task, as usual, we set the task to current, set your task to in progress, and load dependencies. This, of course, will set up your scene and will load everything for you to make your job ready to start. And as you can see, the setup was loaded and the rig was retargeted by the animation, which is here, because this is configured to be loaded using the method retarget process, which is in this case retarget rig. So it's configured on retarget rig. Of course, if we went to frame 900, this is where the simulation starts from, and all what you need to do is to just create asset locator and click on publish, just like what we did in the close. And of course, all the ready to start tasks, just like the close or anything else, you will find them in the project database as ready to start, that you can submit them for automatic simulation by selecting all the ready to start tasks and clicking on submit to tractor. But we don't usually do this because sometimes you want to load the dependencies and see if there is any other additional connections you need to do. As usual, this is because this process is supported on the farm. Seneferu is asking you if you would like to do batch publish, because this is a long time processing process, and so because during the publish the cache will be written, so it would take some time. So he's asking you if you want to do batch publish. I say yes. I will want to have it to be published on the farm. So all the simulation will be running on the farm. So that's it, and the job is submitted to tractor, and we can go now and see, yeah, the job is now running to simulate, and the task was set to processing. When it's finished, it will be published, and this will go for reviewing. Now let's simulate one of the shots that requires hair compound sim, like this one here. As usual, we set the task to current, then we set our task to in progress, then we click on load dependencies. Then the production manager will do everything needed to make your task ready to start. So you can just go ahead and do your job without bothering yourself about anything else. What Seneferu is doing now is that he is loading the closed compound setup. And remember that we have in this setup, we have a static rig cache, and we had a static closed setup cache, which is one frame simulated of the closed and one frame cached of the rig. If we look now what Seneferu did, you will find that this now is closed simulation version 2, and this is animation version 1, because what Seneferu did is that he loaded, the production manager loaded the hair compound sim and retargeted the rig inside this setup by the animation and retargeted the closed setup by the simulation. So if you go now like this, then you will find that your setup is ready to simulate. All what you need to do now is to create asset locator and publish. I will say batch publish, so I can submit this to simulate and publish on the farm. If you want to run the simulation locally on your system, then you can click on just publish, which will do the publish job in the current Maya session. Confirm. This will set the status to processing until the processing finishes and the task is published after all the files and caches are generated.